What's up YouTube? It's Nerdy, and welcome to Pokemon Champions. Today I wanted to give a quick, brief, hopefully, discussion on the Pokemon Champions early metagame, as we've had the game for a little under a month now. And I wanted to talk about a team that I've been using, hopefully give you an opportunity to try it out for yourself, and let me know what you think as well, and potentially even start talking about some competitions that may be coming to the Transmissions Draft League in the future, whether that be through Pokemon Champions or otherwise. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So first off, I did want to talk about the Pokemon Champions metagame. Obviously, the top 5 Pokemon say a lot about a metagame. 3 of them you see here in front of you: Incineroar, Sinistcha, Sneasler, and Kingambit, as well as Garchomp. Those are the top 5 Pokemon of the format, and I do think that this says a lot about this format. Incineroar, Sinistcha form the backbone of a lot of balance / good stuff. The good stuff teams are around. I would say that this metagame is very weather dependent, and that has meant that a lot of these Pokemon that bully weather around are really, really good. For example, you see one of them in front of you, Aerodactyl, really good into a lot of Pokemon in this format. It's kind of a gigantic low up for that Pokemon. But I think based off of those Pokemon, you can kind of tell that it's not the most healthy metagame. I'd say the issue that I have with this metagame is more so the limit to how many Pokemon are in the game and how many items are available in the game. The lack of items in the game has meant that Pokemon that don't necessarily need an item are even better, and Pokemon that free up an item slot for you, for example a Mega Pokemon, are even more valuable. And I believe that this was done on purpose because the Pokemon Company obviously wanted to make Megas much more like a part of the game. That being said, I don't think that that's the end of the world. However, what I do think is a little bit tougher for the game itself is the fact that the best Pokemon in the format are in some ways toxic, in other ways very manageable. Of course, we talk about a Pokemon like Sneasler, which in the past was a very hated Pokemon because of Dire Claw's ability to really change the game. Now, Dire Claw still does have that ability, but it is significantly nerfed. It's no longer a coin flip, instead a 30% chance, which is still significant. Everyone who thinks about Scald Burns obviously knows how backbreaking a 30% infliction chance is. But I also think about Pokemon like Garchomp, which set the speed tier really high, as well as the bulk tier really high. I say this alongside Kingambit. Both of these Pokemon hit really hard and have really good bulk numbers that basically mean that any Pokemon that isn't either A, able to completely delete those Pokemon, or has relative stats to those Pokemon is kind of unviable. Now, I will say that for some of these Pokemon, they are more manageable, and it's definitely not the worst metagame we've ever had. Obviously, I can think of other specific mega formats that were a lot more toxic to actually be a part of. And although this format is still not my favorite, I have found myself enjoying it when you kind of figure out the metagame. And that's the other thing I'll mention about the meta right now, is that it does kind of feel solved. There are good teams right now. I'll mention basically every weather at this point. Rain is obviously really good because Archuludon and Basculegion are in the game, and as long as those 2 Pokemon are available, Rain will always be good. Sun is really good in the game because Mega Charizard Y is really solid, although early metagames had Mega Charizard Y and Venusaur. A lot of the Sun teams have ended up shaving Venusaur and just leaned into the hyper offense of Whimsicott, Mega Charizard Y, and Garchomp, as Garchomp is just a natural partner for Mega Charizard. But there has also been really good sand teams. Of course, Tyranitar is in the game along with Excadrill, and Garchomp is a natural fit on that team as well. But even Mega Tyranitar has been around and really good, especially for its ability to almost always win the weather war no matter what. And then Snow has been around. Snow is a lot of a smaller strategy, very similar to Charizard Y as of the moment, where it's basically just Mega Frostlass, either as a main damage dealer or as a synergistic support Pokemon that just so happens to have a really fast, really strong Blizzard. Obviously, like I said, all of the weathers are really good. Hard Trick Room is obviously a really strong thing because there are a couple of really good Megas for Trick Room, namely Mega Golurk and Mega Crabominable. But also, Torkoal is in the game, and as long as Torkoal is in the game, Trick Room will be really good. There are a couple of other strategies. As I mentioned, Good Stuff is really good right now. Incineroar, Sinistra, plus just any amount of setup. Perish is also in the game, and that is because Mega Gengar is an all-in-one Perish Pokemon, and it basically fits perfectly onto Good Stuff. So although I don't have a version of that team here, if you basically just switch out the last 4 Pokemon on this team with a Mega Gengar, something like Kommo-o, as well as a couple of other support Pokemon, maybe even keep Aerodactyl on the team, you've got a essentially perfect Perish Trap team. And that is obviously really good in the format. And the last thing that I'll mention is, of course, gimmick teams. There are a couple of gimmick teams out there. Namely, I'm looking at Mega Hawlucha teams. These are teams that are wanting to entrainment no guard onto a Pokemon within a one-hit KO move. Those teams are not very good as long as you know what they're doing, so just keep an eye out for that if you see that in the team builder. Now, I've talked enough about the metagame at large. I will get a little bit more in depth with the team here, and hopefully either in the Discord or somewhere in the description of this video, you will see a team ID for this team in front of you that you can try out for yourself in Pokemon Champions. So let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to start with Incineroar. This is the king of VGC, although it has fallen off a little bit. That's mainly because Sneasler and Kingambit are 2 of the best Pokemon right now, and even Garchomp's not the best for it. Obviously, your Intimidate does land on it, but even Garchomp is a hostile Pokemon to you. That being said, Incineroar really does hold this team together. It is basically a perfect matchup into Mega Frostlass, which otherwise does kind of provide a couple of issues for this team. But Mega Frostlass literally cannot touch Incineroar at all. Aside from that, Fake Out, Parting Shot are extremely necessary for this team. The one thing I will add is that actually Incineroar hits hard enough that Flare Blitz is a really good backup plan for Kingambit, which otherwise actually can't really hurt you other than like a Swords Dance boosted Kowtow Cleave, which even then you do resist it. So you know, just play around it the best that you can. Try not to give it a Defiant boost. You can't avoid that in certain situations. Throat Chop is also really good. Now I'm running a really slow Incineroar. That's because I do have Trick Room on this team. But it's more so just so that it can function against hard Trick Room teams, as that matchup is also a little bit rougher for us, but not the worst. I'll kind of show you a lot of what our game plans look like versus very common teams right now. But Throat Chop is really good versus Pokemon that have Hyper Voice. Looking at a Pokemon like Farigiraf, even a Pokemon we have on this team, Mega Gardevoir. Primarina is obviously a huge one, and Sylveon is also in the game. Now all of those Pokemon, except for Farigiraf, take resisted damage, so you're not doing it for the damage, you're doing it for the disabling of sound-based moves. But this does also work into opposing Incineroar that are trying to use Parting Shot, so keep that in mind. If you have your speed control, whether that be Tailwind or Trick Room, you can stop your opponent from using Parting Shot against you. Like I said, Flare Blitz is really good in a format where Sun is good, but it's also really good in a format where you only have really Sneasler as an answer to Kingambit or redirection support. And so having a kind of safety net of Incineroar does help out a lot. Other than that, this Pokemon is absolutely fantastic. A lot of times, what this team can do is just set up Mega Gardevoir and every single turn just switch in Incineroar, switch out Incineroar, and click Hyper Voice. And there's very few teams that completely invalidate that strategy. But when this strategy works as intended, it's basically unbeatable. Like Gardevoir plus Incineroar plus Sinistcha beats a lot of the metagame. Speaking of, Sinistcha is the next one up. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on the actual spread for Sinistcha. But we got Rage Powder, Trick Room, Machagacha, and Shadow Ball. Every single move is absolutely important on this Pokemon. Rage Powder is important because Kingambit sucks to play against if you don't have Sneasler. You need to be able to redirect those Sucker Punches away so that your Gardevoir or Incineroar can deal with it without the threat of going down before they move. Trick Room is also really good for opposing Trick Room teams. And now this team is not slow enough to really set up Trick Room unless you get a perfect prediction of the same turn they set up Tailwind. I don't rely on it too much. It's more so just to reverse Trick Room early, as Sinistcha is super bulky. But aside from that, Machagacha keeps this Pokemon alive for a long time. Shadow Ball is really good for ghost types that otherwise you do struggle with outside of Incineroar. Namely, a Pokemon like Basculegion can be really tough for this team. But even a Pokemon like Mega Frostlass or Mega Gengar, those can be made much more manageable when they are in range of something like a Throat Chop or a Hyper Voice from Gardevoir. Now the spread on Sinistcha is super important. We are running 28 HP. Now initially this was 30 HP because that gets us to a multiple of 16. However, with Sinistcha, what we would prefer is be an even number, which is why we're running 28. It gets us to 174. So that we get maximum Citrus Berry healing. Remember, Pokemon rounds down. And because Pokemon rounds down, we want to actually be a multiple of 15. In this case, 14, because that is the highest even number closest to 16. So that we take a minimum number of sand damage. If we invested those 2 extra HP points, we actually take an extra point of sand damage every turn. Now, our sand matchup is honestly near 100-0. This team matches up so well into sand, it's unbelievable. However, what this team does kind of focus on is just having the versatility to be used in basically every matchup. Now we do run physically defensive Sinistcha because, like I said, Kingambit is around. You can live a non-+1 Sucker Punch with this spread, which does allow you to potentially get Machagacha Burns on that Pokemon, which can absolutely change the game. And then, of course, we are running max Special Bulk with our remaining EVs so that we can potentially live something like a Blizzard, although we will show that we have a lot of extra tech for that. Overall, Sinistcha is just absolutely amazing on this team. For the Rage Powder and for the Hospitality, this Pokemon sticks around for a long time and helps your team stick around for a long time. It makes Gardevoir really difficult to remove when in tandem with Incineroar, so awesome Pokemon to have on the team. Next up we have Aerodactyl, which is my pick for the biggest glow-up Pokemon and Pokemon Champions. In my opinion, base Aerodactyl is much better than Mega Aerodactyl. It's still fast enough to outspeed basically everything in the meta. The only thing that outspeeds it is, I believe, Dragapult and Mega Aerodactyl, so not very much, as neither of those Pokemon are super common. So you have the technically second fastest Tailwind in the game, aside from Prankster. Wide Guard is also really good. There's a ton of spread moves in this game. If you think about just the weather teams, there's Heat Wave and Earthquake, there's Rock Slide, there's Blizzard, there is Water Spout from Mega Blastoise, and there's just so many spread moves that Wide Guard actually comes in super clutch and helps patch up a lot of those matchups that otherwise, if you lose a key Pokemon, do mainly end of the game. Now, Aerodactyl is really good versus two specific archetypes, and that being Sun and specifically Sneasler. Dual Wing Beat does KO Sneasler no matter what, and that allows you to, because you outspeed Sneasler, make a lot of space for specifically Mega Gardevoir. Um, I'm not running Protect on this set despite having Focus Sash, and that's simply because a lot of teams respect the fact that Aerodactyl just has Protect. Um, this comes in the form of normally Aerodactyl will run Protect over Wide Guard. I prefer the Wide Guard simply for a lot of those matchups where it is a shock, especially in like a Trick Room matchup where normally we would be favored, but if we lose a Pokemon like Incineroar or Gardevoir, it can be really tough. Wide Guard actually changes the math because something like Torkoal wanting to spam Eruption or Heat Wave does get blocked by that Wide Guard and allows us to play our way through Trick Room that normally we wouldn't be able to. Overall, Aerodactyl might be my favorite Pokemon on this team, as it's not traditionally good. It's definitely not a strong Pokemon in the sense that it's going to win the game, but it might, because getting rid of a Pokemon like Sneasler or like Charizard does make so much room for the rest of this team that it kind of does win games on its own. Next up, we have our own Sneasler. Sneasler is really good in this format because of White Herb. With Intimidates flying around, you can just get a free Unburden boost, which is obviously really nice. Also, like I said with Garchomp, 120 is kind of the new baseline for speed stats. Either you're faster or you're slower than Sneasler, and with it being the most used Pokemon in the metagame right now, it is absolutely everywhere. It is the all-in-one answer to Kingambit, Incineroar. It even does pretty well into Sinistcha with this specific set because we do have Throat Chop, and it does fine into Garchomp. Um, Obviously, you prefer to be able to use your Fake Out and Close Combat, but if you are faster than the Garchomp, if it comes in on a Close Combat, it does actually drop to 2 of those, meaning that you are set up pretty nice. Even if Intimidate's not flying around, remember Close Combat does drop your defenses, which allows you to eat up your White Herb and get rid of your defensive drops, thereby giving you the Unburden boost. So this gives this team instant speed control, and because this Pokemon, or this team in general, does struggle with a lot of Ghost types, we are running that Throat Chop in the final slot. Again, mostly for the Basculegion. That Pokemon is our hardest matchup in the current metagame, and Rain in general is actually pretty hard for this team, but we'll get into kind of like the ways to play around that and how to like keep up in this like more difficult metagame. Close Combat, like I said, does take care of another one of our really difficult matchups in Kingambit. Obviously, if your game plan is all around Gardevoir, you want to have as many answers to the Pokemon that beat Gardevoir. So the big ones in the format currently are a Pokemon like Kingambit and Sneasler, but also Archaludon is kind of a problem for Mega Gardevoir if you're not already set up. Obviously, a Mega Gardevoir that has 1 or 2 Calm Mind boosts, it kind of just outbulks and outdamages Archaludon, which allows it to really break through the game. Speaking of breaking through the game, we have Espathra. Now, Espathra is really good for a ton of reasons, and you can kind of see why. So, first of all, Bright Powder doesn't activate a lot, but man, does it seem to come in clutch every single time you actually need it. Espathra is really fast in the metagame because of speed boost, but also 105 base speed does mean that after a single speed boost, you do outspeed literally everything in the game. Most Basculegion in this current format run a Scarf rather than Swift Swim, which does mean after 1 speed boost you do outspeed them, no matter what. On top of that, Lumina Crash combos with our special attackers. This includes Sinistcha, who is not very strong, but after a special defense drop, does actually start hitting pretty hard as long as it's not resisted. The main things for Espathra though are, in my opinion, Psychic Terrain and Ally Switch. This changes the math a lot. Firstly, Ally Switch. Ally Switch is kind of our, oh shit, I need to have 1 extra chance of beating Kingambit or Basculegion in situations where it's Espathra Gardevoir versus one of those Pokemon. Ally Switch plus Hyper Voice kind of can almost win the game on its own, where Last Respects will hit into Espathra or Iron Head or Sucker Punch, whatever it is will hit into Espathra instead of Gardevoir, giving Gardevoir the chance to close out the game, which normally it can. Gardevoir hits incredibly hard. Psychic Terrain is also really good because versus a team that does rely on a lot of those Pokemon that otherwise would stop Hyper Voice, they are super weak to the Expanding Force. However, the best part of Psychic Terrain is actually the ability to stop Prankster Pokemon and priority spamming Pokemon from running over the team. Espathra plus Gardevoir is really good into the current Rain team, as the current Rain team actually drops Pelipper for Sableye. Sableye is really freaking annoying for this team to handle, because without Psychic Terrain, normally you want to lead Gardevoir and set up Calm Mind. However, if you get Encored into Calm Mind, the game can kind of end. Now, this does mean that you still need to play safe versus Sableye, but it is still really nice to have. Mainly looking at the ability to just allow extra space for Gardevoir and Espathra. When Sableye is in that position where it cannot do a lot of its disruptive things, obviously it will resort to Light Screen and Rain Dance. However, that's way more preferred than what it tends to normally do, which is lock you into your setup moves, lock you into fake out. Those kinds of things can really slow your team down when you are trying to set up and sweep your way through, as that is your best way really of taking out the opponent's strongest Pokemon such as Archuludon and Basculegion. Now, with that being said, I do think that this Rain matchup can be patched a little bit better. We can potentially look at other strategies to patch up that matchup. I do think that Espathra has a really good spot on this team, but specifically for the Basculegion matchup, there is potential that there is a better Pokemon here. So keep an eye out for that. There is also an argument that potentially instead of Ally Switch or Psychic Terrain, you run Shadow Ball just for the ability to be able to try and knock out those Pokemon. You would need a ton of special attack, as I bring up Basculegion, and then we bring up Espathra. In order to KO a Pokemon like that, you would need more than you can invest, unfortunately. So essentially what this means is that you need to be able to hit this Pokemon twice in order to take it out. Now, like I said, because Basculegion is normally a Choice Scarf Pokemon, it does need to be able to switch its moves if it wants to take out your team. Last Respects is obviously the best option versus your team, but that does give a ton of space for a Pokemon like Incineroar. Thanks to Archuludon not having Body Press, actually matches up okay into Rain as long as Basculegion is not clicking Water type moves. However, I do prefer to go after Rain teams in a little bit more offensive way, whether that be through Tailwind or through Espathra or Gardevoir. That is kind of my preferred method dealing with those teams. Next up, we have Gardevoir. Gardevoir is the centerpiece of this team. You're basically never going to leave it behind just because it is that strong. This is super physically defensive, and I wanted to show you Sneasler versus this Pokemon with max attack, a Dire Claw versus this Gardevoir Mega. Actually has a 0% chance to OHKO from full health and does roughly 83 to 99%. So you do guaranteed live that Dire Claw, and of course because you are running Expanding Force, even without the Psychic Terrain you do guaranteed OHKO that Pokemon back. But even with a Hyper Voice, you are doing pretty good damage if you catch it on the switch. You're doing roughly 60% damage to that Pokemon if you catch it on the switch, which doesn't mean that through redirection or through fake out support, you are able to KO that Pokemon without needing to switch to your Psychic type attacks. Now, obviously that does beg the question, why would you run something like Expanding Force if you have Hyper Voice? Now there are some Pokemon that do have Soundproof in the current metagame. the main one that I am thinking of is something like Kommo-o. Kommo-o does run soundproof because of its ability to be immune to Perish Song, which does mean that it is actually immune to Hyper Voice as well. Which does mean that you do actually need Expanding Force to hit it. Good news is, Expanding Force is really good into those Perish Trap teams because it also hits Mega Gengar. So Espathra plus Gardevoir is actually really good into those teams, meaning that your matchup is completely repaired by the fact that you do have Expanding Force. So thank goodness for that. That being said, I love this Gardevoir set. It hits just hard enough with that 5 and modest investment that after one Calm Mind boost you can really sweep through teams. But you also have enough bulk through your physical investment that you can actually get multiple Calm Minds up. Now your speed investment is a little bit lower, but you have so much support in terms of Fake Out and Redirection and Tailwind support, as well as this Espathra support, that basically means that Gardevoir doesn't really need the speed investment. And like I said, because you have that bulk investment, can actually live multiple hits. And thanks to Calm Mind's special defense boost, you also get that benefit on your special defense side, which does mean that Gardevoir is actually the best answer for hard Trick Room teams in terms of specifically teams that are running like Mega Golurk can be a little bit tough, but Incineroar obviously makes that matchup a lot easier. Essentially, Gardevoir versus any special attacking Pokemon is always Gardevoir's match to lose, aside from a Pokemon like Mega Gengar, which can be an issue if it is able to attack you before you get that Calm Mind boost. That being said, I love Mega Gardevoir. It hits super hard in this format, and it does actually work a lot better in my opinion than Mega Floette, just because of its bulk and, in my opinion, more varied methods of offense. That being said, there is an argument that Mega Floette is probably better on a team like this, and in which case, if you wanted to make your own version of this team, I would recommend dropping Mega Gardevoir for Mega Floette, and then dropping Espathra for a better answer to Rain. So keep that in mind. A really good Pokemon, in my opinion, for that would be Heliolisk. Heliolisk is really good into Basculegion specifically because of its normal typing and dry skin, meaning it is immune to all of Basculegion's best attacks. And then as an electric type, it does also threaten to do big damage to all of those rain Pokemon. So yeah, that is what I got for this game. Hopefully you all did enjoy my breakdown of Pokemon Champions, and hopefully you all give this team a try. If you do, let me know how you do. If you did not notice, 1900 is the best MMR rating that I ended up reaching with this team, which puts me in the top 20,000 in the world. So big shout outs to this team. We've done really well with it so far. So let me know how you do in the comments down below, and I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye bye.